Please welcome our panel, Navigating Data Tooling and Expertise to Achieve High-Quality AI Training Data, with Chris Barker from CBC Transportation Consulting, 𝗂𝗲𝗄𝘆 from DataLoop, Chris Carlin from Superb AI, Michael Hazard from Applied Tuition, and moderated by 𝗳𝗿𝗄𝗆 from iMerit.
Avi, Michael, and Chris, thank you very much for joining this session on enterprise tooling and expert users to help improve the data tooling ecosystem. Very happy to have you here. Let's jump in to really the main topic. Avi, we've worked for a few years together. You've been through a journey. What would you say are what customers are looking for in what defines enterprise-grade software versus early-stage software? What are some of those experiences you've been through in the last couple of years?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me. And what I would say that we learned in DataLoop in the past, I would say 3 to 5 years when working with enterprise and big companies, is basically what those companies are looking for is high availability of system, stability, becoming from a demo, a premature tool to a polished enterprise-grade platform. Eventually, all those companies are now in the research phase, in development phase. Only 5% out of them is heading into production. And what we're seeing is kind of like a transition in the next, I would say, 2 to 5 years, that a lot of company will go and start to use in production their AI application. So in tool perspective, they will really want that the platform and the tools that they will use will start to scale up without any issues and qualities. They will want to create a customization on the workflow in terms that it will take the shapes on the platform and connect humans, and basically they can scale their workflow with the humans and especially the data quality. And eventually they will be very strict on SLA. So once all those companies, great companies like working with retailers and medical and agriculture, that eventually we need to provide human in the loop to provide answers to the end customers, they will need to provide SLA. And that's what I would think that will be in the next 2 to 3 years, and especially in the elements of a great product in enterprise grade.
Thanks. So, Michael, kind of same question to you. I think you deal with a far more, I would say, integrated pipeline with your customers. You're running simulations using their data. You're integrating very deeply. So, how has it moved for you? What investments have you had to make in order to play with large customers?
Yeah, so at Applied Intuition, where I focus on synthetic data generation, I think the biggest difference we see with enterprise-grade customers or customers that are looking to actually deploy systems to customers in the field is that they need to be able to build a safety case on top of our technology, which means that the technology needs to be validated. It can't have any flake. It needs to be proven to correlate to the real world. And without that, the investment isn't worthwhile because it can't replace extensive real-world testing or data collection. Beyond that, echoing some of the things that Avi said, I think collaborative workflows become more important at larger companies where you start to see specific roles be handled by specific individuals rather than having certain folks wear all hats. Just being able to hand off one part of the workflow where maybe you've identified an issue to the actual engineer who will triage and solve that issue is a key part of making sure the tool scales with the enterprise.
So specifically to any of you, is there a checklist of 4 or 5 big things you should have as a software company to reach that level? I mean, I know we're kind of in opposition a little bit to the move fast and break things. There's a time for that, and then there's a time for you keep things stable. So if any of you can share, best practices that you've had to introduce as a response to, customers needing that.
Yeah, so when we're delivering synthetic data for training, we actually have a rigorous quality assurance process for that data. Automating our systems is critical so that we can generate hundreds of thousands or millions of frames of training data. At the same time, we can't let bad data pass through and out of our doors. So we do have tools that are built to help us QA that data and ensure that it continues to work. Some of those tools are based on actually running model inference and ensuring that the data actually has correlated performance to the real data we're trying to complement. So that's one thing that we do on the training side. And then on the software in the loop and hardware in the loop testing side, it's about having automated tests and, again, rigorous QA every time we're deploying a new build of our software. And we track any failure that does happen so that we can go through a formal postmortem and adapt our QA processes accordingly.
Chris, how about you? Is there a checklist of stuff you've had to do?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. And by the way, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here. One thing I wanted to add to what Michael was saying, that it's something that we're focusing on at 𝗁𝗲 is essentially cross-functional user interoperability of the technology itself. And 𝗁𝗲 referenced this as well. I think that plays sort of is going to play a deep role in the ability of cross-functional stakeholders in the ML lifecycle to collaborate effectively. And so what I mean by...
Can you unpack that a little more? That's quite a mouthful.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that sort of we're seeing enterprise companies operate today is, in effect, in a lot of ways, as a legacy sort of waterfall type software development mode when it comes to machine learning. And we want to get to a place where it's really sort of more so mimicking the principles of DevOps and bring, ML operations into actual fruition. In order to do that, the premise that we're working on is you have to have, professional data labelers, machine learning engineers, data scientists, data ops people, largely interacting with one another in a meaningful, material way. And one way to facilitate that is by virtue of the technology you're using to bring some of these AI applications to life. And so if cross-functional stakeholders can engage with one another, via a common platform or common series of tools, that becomes a really meaningful step forward to sort of bring the ML ops principles to life.
Cool. So, maybe riffing off of this, when you're Series A, you have so many demands on your time and your money. So where does this fit in? Do you kind of respond to the big customers' needs? How do you triage this stuff? I think anyone can jump in.
Yeah, so I will jump in. So I think the first thing is to get a better understanding on your market and your customers. Okay, again, it's very critical. You have a long runway, okay, and you need to justify any dollar that you put in the roadmap and in the product. So eventually, in the tool perspective, you need to understand your customer very, very good. You need to understand your users. You need to look exactly what are the value that you can provide with a minimal development phase. And more than that, you need to look further in the roadmap and understand what will be the next phase. Okay, so I really connect to what Chris said. In MLOps, eventually, the most important thing is community.
I think we briefly lost you, Avi, but we'll try and get you back. So let me talk about the flip side of this, right? I mean, we are finding increasing functionality in the tools, lots of new features. It's no longer just annotation or labeling. There's curation, there's workflows. So our people are having to deep dive into the platforms. How do your customers and users deal with this increased complexity? So as you add more and more functionality, as you try and help them with more aspects of the pipeline, do you also find like a cognitive load? How do you help them kind of get through that, other than reading HTML documentation?
I can start by jumping in on that one. So there's two different ways that we have folks using our sensor simulation product. One is to validate that a system meets very specific requirements, and the other is to generate millions of frames of training data. our hypothesis has been that 80% of the use cases for both of those two things should be very easy to fulfill. So building a test case should take a matter of minutes. And we facilitated that with a graphical editor that hides a lot of the complexity, but allows you to discover new features as you go. On the actual data set generation side, what we found is that ML engineers already have a way of thinking about and conceptualizing the data they want to generate and train on. They think about the classes that are present, the distributions of those classes, the sensors they're using to image them, and the annotations they need to have their model function and learn. But they don't think about things like whether a car is taking an unprotected left turn between seconds 3 and 5 of a scenario. So we've actually completely changed the way that folks define synthetic data when they're ML engineers as opposed to validation engineers. And getting closer to how people initially think about things has made the onboarding experience simpler and made it a lot easier for people to get what they need with just 20 lines of specification as opposed to hours per frame of data.
I think just to quickly add, Jade, piggyback off of something that Avi said in relation to your question, it comes down to the users and how you're making sure to provide the value that they need when they're using your tool. And I think a lot of this actually comes down to design as well. You know, for example, for a professional data labeling team like iMerit, right? You know, if they're operating in 𝗁𝗸𝗿𝗄, we want them to feel like it's an iPhone. You know, that it's intuitive, it's easy to use, you don't need to be trained. On the flip side of things, if you're an ML engineer or you're a data scientist, you know, you don't necessarily want to operate in iOS. You know, you may prefer a robust SDK CLI type of interface so you can, you know, do all the magic that you know how to do with code. And so making sure that you're sort of, you know, allowing for the user flows that are most desirable for these different types of stakeholders so that they can use the technology without, you know, some robust, unique onboarding that they have to go through is also something that we've been focusing on.
Sure, thanks. I mean, Avi, I can, ask you, I hope your connection is back now. I know you're joining from Israel and it's late in the night. But yeah, do you find the iceberg problem? Do you find that most of your customers are using only a small piece of the functionality of the platform you've built? Or what are the trends on that? How are you nudging them to explore more and use more of the functionality?
So I think, and to what Chris said, so eventually in MLOps, it's all about communication and collaboration. Think about that when you're working in MLOps, it's a lot of different individuals in different places. So the data scientist can be in Palo Alto or in Tel Aviv, while the data developers, the data annotator, will be probably in India. Okay, so how you can communicate between them.
You're good. Keep going.
So how you can communicate between them, and eventually is how you are providing them a way to discover more and more effective tools, more and more ways to work on it.
Okay, and is that a big investment in sort of like documentation or videos or a customer success? Like Chris, how's that grown over the last year or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think our approach is to try and make the process as simple as it possibly can be. Things like short and digestible user videos so that, folks, if they need to be onboarded onto a platform, can do so on their own time, easily. Good documentation is always sort of, it's table stakes, right? It's really important for everyone to have documentation, both on the technical side and the non-technical user side. So those are certainly things that we've been building, continue to build out as we release new product at 𝗁𝗸𝗏. And it also helps to gut check, right? Like how are users really looking at your technology? How are they really engaging in the platform? And ultimately, as Avi referenced, interacting with one another in the platform. are our theories and hypotheses as to how that's happening correct? And all of that sort of comes into play when we're designing our tool sets for the enterprise and for other types of organizations.
Sure. I mean, I think even we've seen over the last several years, we're no longer in the world of micro-tasking, like 30 seconds, simple categorization task. We're increasingly using, an hour, 2 hours to do a very intricate task. We're managing that at scale. We're managing that with customers. We're building all kinds of dashboards and reports. So for us, it's a constant race to really keep up with all the new feature releases, all the new capabilities, and understand what we should use, how we should show that piece to customers, I guess, and make them comfortable with it beyond the task level. I think that's what we've experienced as users of your platforms. So, I mean, what do we, building off of that, what kind of problems are still unsolved or have been unsolved by tooling in the ML ops space? What do you think is still out there, and that, not necessarily that you might immediately get to it, but things that you go, yeah, these are some things that I can see need to be solved?
I can start briefly, and then I'm really actually curious to hear how Michael and Avi think about this. But something that we see a lot at 𝗁𝗂𝗏, and actually we see a lot of this in the enterprise in particular, is a challenge of getting from 0 to 1, whether that's as part of the R&D phases or even full-fledged production and developing, a data pipeline and bringing ML to life. And so what we really work with our partners on is mapping out all the processes that, they have in place today. How do they envision those processes and sort of collaboration points across stakeholders tomorrow? And then ultimately, what's an ideal state look like? And how do we sort of get from status quo today into that ideal state tomorrow? And that's actually not really a technology question. It's more of a consulting and process development, change management question that we work through with our partners and customers at 𝗁𝗂𝗏. I think that's actually one of the biggest barriers that the industry faces. And maybe I'm naive because I'm not as technical as Avi and Michael, but it is something that organizations large and small need to work through to really bring not only the theories and principles of MLOps to life, but also to bring actual AI applications to market. And I would agree with a lot of what Avi mentioned earlier. Most organizations are sort of in this proof of concept R&D phase and haven't yet gone to, release of product to their customer bases. And so working through those collaboration process elements, I think, is something that is really important that we see a lot in the marketplace.
Yeah, we see the same issue. Essentially, every human checkpoint that you add to the model training cycle between evaluating your current model, prioritizing future data acquisition and labeling, and retraining slows down that process and also introduces an element of error. The way that we're trying to address that is actually by finding places where we can reduce or remove human interaction, doing things like looking at model performance or data set distribution, and actually proactively generating data to cover those gaps. And our hope is that we can actually end up with a closed data engine that can be monitored by a human, but that doesn't require that human to play a role in every single iteration of the model's training.
And in some sense, I guess synthetic data is a new kid on the block, right? It's seen as an emerging kind of technique. Not the knowledge about it, but rather the use of it. What sort of, are you seeing that as a are you positioning that as a non-traditional solution to some of these problems? Are you pursuing other non-traditional solutions at Applied Intuition? What does the roadmap look like?
Yeah, our opinion is that industry leaders will always use synthetic data, but they will never stop using real data. There are two tools in your toolbox. There's also other techniques that people are pioneering, like few shot or single shot learning, that will be critical. So what we're looking to do is find out what data can we generate and replace at the highest quantities. How can we solve problems like rarity that cannot be solved in the real world? So collecting thousands or millions of examples of vehicles driving the wrong way down the highway, or pedestrians close to vehicles which you wouldn't want to go out and do a dedicated collect on. And then looking into strategies for how our synthetic data will actually be used in addition to real data, because it's not as straightforward as one might think. You have to change your training structure. You have to use the data in the correct ratio, which is task dependent and class dependent. So there's a lot of things that we're looking into to make sure that these pieces all fit together well into production-ready models.
What about you, Avi? What are you thinking in terms of breaking this traditional kind of boundaries of deep learning?
Yeah, so I think that there will be a transition in the area of the data annotators. Basically, they will be involved between data annotators to data developers, exactly like software developers. They will work on data. They will be data developers, and essentially they will go into data developers of pipelines. They probably have the most understanding of the data. They see a lot of examples. They understand what's working and what's not working, what is easy to annotate, where are the edge cases, where are the anomalies. So eventually providing those data developers the best tools to break the barrier of working on an entire data set, to provide them a very efficient tools to work on micro tasks, to provide them the way to break down into micro tasks and prevent quality issues. I think that will be the next phase of deep learning. Of course, there will be a lot of using of self-supervised, and with all the new generative models and with all the new synthetic data, of course, they will fill up the gaps. But eventually, the ones that working on the data, working on the data, those data developers, I think that they will be involved in the deep learning space in the next 2 to 5 years.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. That sort of concept of data DJs, kind of mixing in synthetic data and some label data and some weakly supervised data, and kind of trying to generate outcomes for the models. I like that. And I think that tooling could play a large part in that. We have a few minutes to switch to some questions that are coming in. I think more at the engineering level than the executive level. Avi, for example, how do you test the stability and scalability of your platform as it pertains to data annotation?
Oh, that's actually a great question. So we have different environments. While we're on each one of the environment, we are loading a lot of different events on different types of users. For example, we are simulate annotators. They're doing a lot of annotations, creating from semantic segmentation to video processing. We have another simulation of data ingest. So uploading like millions of images at once and see the bursts and everything. And eventually we are testing each one of the environments in a specific scenarios that what we love to say it's customer-oriented scenario testing. We actually simulate how the customer will use also in provocative ways and also in burst ways, and also in what we call the silence wave, when there's not a lot of traffic running into our system.
Yeah, that's helpful. So a lot of stress testing, both at the user level and then across the system. Exactly. And then this question always makes AI people tear their hair out in frustration. So I have to ask it. Maybe Michael first. Like, how does domain-specific application of AI impact your strategy, your tooling, your choice of features? And then I'll bounce the same thing to Chris.
Yeah, so for us, different domains have different sensors that are going to be used. In automotive, you'll have a different camera than an aerial. We have different sorts of assets and classes that are of interest, which impact our ability to generate, and I would guess other people's ability to pre-label or assist labelers. And then we also have different environments. So you get different signs showing up between North America and South Korea, or you get different road markings, all of which give us different technical requirements to generate synthetic data with a minimal domain gap, and actually make it quite difficult to expand into new industries and provide a product that's valuable and actually nutritional to the machine learning models.
So, like Chris, do you spend a lot of time trying to understand what's unique to a given domain? Does that lead to bare knuckle fights in the product meetings?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a really important question because, as I know Avi and Michael can both attest to, each customer and the ultimate application that they're developing is totally unique from every other customer in the AI space. Whether it's in agriculture, medicine, industrial engineering and automation, inspection, whatever it may be. And so I think it sort of comes down to the classic credo of, don't try and do too much. And so we really have sort of tried to hone the direction of our technological capabilities and focus on some key things that we know are broadly applicable. And one of those things at 𝗁𝗲 is an emphasis on automation.
Right.
In a lot of different domains, whether that's on the data labeling side or the MLOps with data curation and other sort of things that contribute to that field of activity. But general answer, I think, we need to, as an industry, continue to do better to sort of service a broad variety of use cases, because that's where AI is going. I mean, it's all going to be snowflakes out there.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously spend a lot of time solutioning that last mile and understanding, the specific needs of a particular domain. I think that brings us at time. And just want to thank you guys. It was good, interesting discussion, also very candid. I wouldn't want to be a product manager in, in your shoes with the constant demands and the fast changing kind of needs of the industry. But like, we certainly appreciate the constant developments that are happening in the tooling. We're in a very different place now than we were 5 years back in terms of access to functionality and access to stable tools. So I think we have you guys to thank for that. Thank you for the session, and have a great rest of the day.
Yeah, thanks for hosting us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.